Pilates equipment can vary from just a few pounds to several £1,000s. I get continually asked, what is the best solution for working out at home as if you're on the Reformer? So today we're going to find out. I put my home Reformer up against the £36 Pilates board and the £15 resistance band. And today we're going to find out which one works best. I took 11 classical Reformer Pilates moves and put them on the board and on the band to see if they work or not. Some moves worked pretty well, some were a total fail, and a few were kind of dangerous. So let's get straight into the side-by-side tests. If it works, it gets a green tick. If it doesn't work, or if it technically worked but isn't very practical or kind of misses the point, then it gets a red tick. So starting off with your footwork. So traditionally, Pilates footwork was about the feet, as is in the name. It also works the legs, the abdominals. It works pretty much the whole body, but the priority here is the feet. As you can see with both the Pilates board and with the band, I had to do a standing version. Now, this is great for the legs. You can power through the core, but in terms of working the feet, it kind of misses the point. So we're going to give them an X. In terms of your home workout, absolutely fine to do this. You will just not be doing the kind of Pilates version, not your Reformer version. Movement number 2 is your long stretch. So as you can see, it kind of worked quite well here on the Pilates board. I chose to put my hands on the board itself rather than my toes. One, because I can kind of control the length a little bit better, but also it was a little bit easier to film it this way. You could, however, put your feet on it, and it is actually very similar to your long stretch, minus the height. So it is a little bit more intense. You could as easily go down onto your forearms though, and it would still be quite heavy on the abdominals and the shoulders, just a little less challenging on the wrists. So on the mat, you can do your high plank. You could put gliders under your hands or your feet. I gave it a go under my hands here, just with a couple of towels, but I didn't want to add in extra equipment for the video, apart from the band and of course the mat. If you do have gliders or a slightly more slippery floor than I do, then it might work to use towels and work your long stretch on the floor. The same as with the board, you're low down, so you haven't got the height of the foot bar, so it will be a little bit more intense, not to mention you don't have the support of the spring. So on the mat, it's going to be incredibly intense, and you probably won't get that much range. So we're going to give it a tick for the board, but an X for the mat. So number 3, drawing the sword. Now, this was one of the movements that worked best across all 3, as there was quite even resistance. It was easy to find an anchor point on the mat. And of course, on the Reformer, it works well. This would apply to a lot of your single arm work. So things like your dumb waiters or things like your hugger tree, if you're doing it with just one arm. It would work quite well because the height lends well, the resistance lends well, and we can kind of position ourselves on the board or the mat to find that level of resistance. Bear in mind, one of the biggest challenges with the band is finding the anchor point. The anchor point is where you secure the band to, so that it doesn't so then you're not just kind of flinging a band from side to side, so that you've actually got resistance. For example, if I use my band here now, my left hand is the anchor point, and then my right hand is the one pulling. Now I could easily sit on the strap, or I could have it under my feet, whichever one it is the anchor point. I chose for this video to not use any external anchor points. For example, you could use a door and a towel to kind of wedge it into place. You could use a heavy object like a sofa, but I wanted this video to be as possible in assuming what people have at home. So I wanted the anchor point to be body weight only to make it a fair comparison. Okay, number 4, bridging. We come up against the height again. Obviously, the board and the mat don't have the height, but this is a movement on Reformer that doesn't rely as much on the spring tension unless we're going into our hamstring curls. If we're just going up and down, then it can be a lighter, it can be a heavier. It just changes the intensity on where it's focused. In terms of our comparison then, it makes it a little bit easier for me to give all 3 a green tick. On the Pilates board, you can actually do things like your hamstring curls, so where we push the feet out and in for a little bit of extra hamstring work. Again, if you've got sliders on the floor, you can do this on the floor as well on the mat. With the resistance band, we don't really need the resistance band for this one. But you could add it, and you could add, for example, some arm work if you could find a nice anchor point or length, like your chest press shown here. And next is our side lying work. So again, as you can see, it works well on all 3. I did here my front and back kicks, pointing and flexing the toe, as well as resisted clamshells. One thing to note is that having the foot in the strap, when it's kind of like this tubey strap that both the resistance band I have, as well as the Pilates board have, it does kind of want to roll around your foot a little bit. So you do have to be quite careful not to lose it. But I am still going to give all 3 of these a green tick because the resistance was consistent throughout. I felt it where I should be feeling it in my glute medius, and it wasn't too tricky to set up. Moving on to our lunges. So again, as you can see, it works on all 3. So green, tick, tick, tick. The board was probably the trickiest on this one because there is actually a resistance band under the glider. So it doesn't just kind of flop around everywhere. And because of the weight of the board, you don't want to press too hard or the board will move. Not to mention limited range. So you might have to move around a little bit, but I don't see that as a big issue. On the mat, again, there was no use for the band here. You can just do it freestyle, free fall, whatever we want to call it. Free-spirited, we'll go with that. So you can just kind of do it free-spirited with a glider or a cloth or a sock or something. It is less support. So the benefit of the Reformer is we can change the resistance to create different challenges. But can you kind of mimic at home? Yeah, you can. So again, we're going to go tick, tick, tick. Short spine massage. Tick, cross, cross. For sure. This was hilariously painful to try and get into. Not painful in a physical sense, just it was not happening. So the problem with both the board and with the band is because most of our body is being lifted up that it's really hard to find that anchor point. The board isn't that heavy. So me trying to push my whole entire body weight up and keep the resistance on the straps, it kind of works, but the idea is you've got that resistance to work against you as you're working down so you can really control through the abs. Whereas here, both the fact that I had to lay on the board a little bit, which wasn't comfortable on my back at all, by the way. Where was I? Oh, yeah. And the fact that the resistance wasn't that heavy, it didn't really give me much support. It was just kind of baffy. Same with the band, because there was no anchor point except for if I'd wanted to my neck, which I didn't want to because that's not particularly comfortable or safe. There's no support on your way down. So you can technically make a movement that looks kind of like your short spine massage, but there's no resistance against you on the way up or down. It's kind of just decorative to have the straps there. So we're going to go for it. Next up, we've got our teaser. Now, this by default is a very advanced move. So whether you want to be doing this or not on the Reformer at home is kind of up to you. I also did it without the box because I don't actually have a box. My flat is quite diddy, so it just feels like more space being taken up. Then maybe I'll get one. You'll have to start watching my videos more for me to be justifying that. But I did it here on the carriage. As for the board and the mat, doing something like the movement is quite possible, as you can see. However, again, we're going to go with XX because it defeats the point. The tension isn't even on the way up or down, and it's not exactly a comfortable move to be doing at home. I'm not saying you can't, it's just not comfortable, and the straps were kind of pointless on the board. As for on the floor, we're literally not using the band at all. So yeah, and having that resistance working against you on the way up just challenges your upper body and your abdominals in a slightly different way to if we don't have the resistance. It was a close call on this one, but I decided they get X's because would you realistically bother to do these movements on the board or on the mat with the band? Probably not. Roll downs. So the idea of the roll down is to articulate the spine nice and slowly. And you always do this on a relatively light resistance because if it's a heavy resistance, it's going to be more fighting against the strap. Whereas what we want is that the strap just gives us that little bit of support back on the journey up. So I often see with this one that people like bend their arms to pull on the straps, pull it close to them. But actually all that strap is doing is giving us a little bit of support on the way back up. So on the Reformer, I did it with the bent legs, but then when I tried it both on the board and the mat, it wasn't possible. Like the board wanted to move around everywhere and the resistance band, I needed to hook it over my feet to be my anchor point. So the movements do actually work. So we are actually going to give them both a tick, even though it looks a little bit different. The movement is working the same muscles and the straps are supporting you in the same way. I did particularly like this one with the band actually. So I think if you do have a band and you're looking for some Pilates exercises at home, this is a really good one. Chest expansion and flies. So this was a little bit difficult to figure out how to do both on the board and with the band. And the board, we're going to give it a tick, but the band, we're going to give an X because there was no anchor point. And because the band was too thick, it was just pressing against my thighs and restricting my range. With another band, maybe you'd be able to, or with an anchor point, you might be able to, but for my band, for my setup, it didn't work. So I'm not going to assume that it does on yours either. With the chest expansion on the Reformer, you want to keep the hands relatively close to the body. And because of the band and the anchor point, I had to kind of like open outwards a lot more with the other two. So on the board, I did actually cross over the straps just so it gave it a little bit of extra resistance so that it had some tautness throughout. But it did work. It was working the right muscles. It wasn't too faffy once I'd figured it out. And you could do this as part of your workout. You could actually also, as well, if you wanted, you could do it standing. By standing, you'll increase the length between the board and the strap, giving you a little bit more resistance. I was trying to be quite strict in my comparisons. It would add an extra dimension of stability and balance that you would have to be mindful not to be arching your back or pushing your hip forward. It does work. Same here with the flies. The idea is to have the hands more or less just to armpit height and be pulling through the lats and the back here. With the resistance band, I found it really hard to pull it open without it pressing on my thighs and pushing me back. But again, on the board, it kind of worked. Final movement, arms in straps, curl ups, and hundreds. This is often done as a series on Reformer, so I've bunged them together. And as you can see, we're going X, X. It's kind of possible to do something that looks like the movement, but quite frankly, there was no resistance on this when I was doing it here. You might as well have just done it without. Same on the mat, I'm doing it without the band. So even though you can do the movements, it's not the same as Reformer. Would I recommend against doing it without? Absolutely not. So in conclusion, how do they compare? Well, if you're really looking for the Reformer experience, I think neither of these alternatives offer that. However, can you get a good home workout out of both of these? Absolutely. There are several channels focused purely on giving these Pilates board workouts. I can recommend Callie Jardine Goulet, not sure if that's how you say it, for the board, and then Lauren George Fitness or Human Reformer for the band. It'll be a mix of more traditional Pilates movements as well as more adapted movements for the band or the board. My biggest surprise was actually the board. I thought it was going to be incredibly gimmicky and not be good for a lot of movements. But given that the straps were actually attached to something, that did make a lot of the movements easier. So I didn't have to always be the anchor. I thought going in, the band would come out on top, but I think they kind of leveled out evenly. So which one should you go for? My advice is if you don't have a regular Reformer studio near you and you're looking for a Reformer workout, invest in the Reformer. Nothing replaces it as much as we want it to and as hard as we keep trying. There are foldable ones that you can store quite easily. However, if that's not in your budget and you want a similar experience, then you could go with the board or the band or both. Neither are that expensive. I would say from this experiment alone, the board is probably more aligned and similar to Reformer. That being said, in a few weeks, I want to do a little review of the Human Reformer, which is an entire workout just using the band. So maybe I'll change my mind. If you do have a Reformer studio near you and you're taking regular classes, then these are a great way to get a workout in the week when you're busy. If you can't afford to do 5 times a week or make it work around you, then they're a great supplement to have at home. It's not going to be the same, but that's okay. They're still a great workout. Bear in mind as well that one of the things that we do love about Reformer is the instruction. It's so nice to have someone guiding you through and for all those smooth transitions. The main drawback of the board and the band is those transitions are not going to be as smooth. You have to kind of reposition the board, reposition the band, whereas all we've got to do on the Reformer is change the springs and ourselves in terms of the physical position, not the emotional or mental side of things. For a lot of Reformer moves, you aren't going to be able to do them on the Pilates board or on the band, specifically for safety, things like your feed-in straps, things like your short spine. I just don't see a way, correct me if I'm wrong, of that being possible and safe on either of those. The Reformer offers you the support, it gives you that range, it's a no-brainer. And then the other benefit of going to your Reformer session still is the adaptable resistance. Now, I'm not saying it's impossible to adapt the resistance on the band or the board, but it is a little bit harder because you have to change your body position, you have to hold the strap, change a different anchor point, or whatever it may be. Both with a band and with a board, they just don't replace the Reformer. They are alternatives, not duplicates. So thanks ever so much for watching. If you do want me to review more Pilates products, just let me know which ones, either in the comments below, or you can DM me specifically on Instagram. If you want to have a look specifically at the Latona Reformer, please feel free to continue watching this video here. Other than that, goodbye from me, and see you next week.